Okay, are you getting tired of me yet? I hope not. I'm not getting tired of reading to you. So, I hope you're ready for another Cinderella story today. So, I can see them over my shoulder over here. So far, we've read, let's see if I can do this right. Adelita. It was a Mexican Cinderella story. Very, very similar to the version that we're used to, our, Walt Disney Cinderella story. And so we had Adelita, and then the Rough-Faced Girl, which was a Native American Cinderella story. Very different. That one had a lot of differences in it, and but still married the prince, or the invisible being, as they called him in that story. Married him in the end. And then Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters. That was an African Cinderella story, and that one was different too, but we noticed that it was really a lot, a lot about kindness. That wasn't a good sentence. There was a lot of kindness in Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters and in the Rough-Faced Girl. So that was a really, three really different stories. This one is the Egyptian Cinderella. So this one's from Egypt. Egypt is in Africa. And so this one is by Shirley Climo, and it's illustrated by Ruth Heller. So also some of the other books had Adelita was the same author and illustrator. Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters was same author and illustrator. Rough-Faced Girl had, just like this one, someone wrote the words and someone drew the pictures. So, a few more differences, not even to do with the story. And I'm going to tell you a little secret right now. I have never read this one, ever. So, this one's new for me. So, but a lot of people have checked it out from the library. It was just checked out not too long ago. So, some people have read it before. So, I hope there's not a lot of hard words for me to pronounce. It's my first time reading this one. So, The Egyptian Cinderella by Shirley Climo and illustrated by Ruth Heller. And hopefully you can see my screen a little better today. Long ago, in the land of Egypt, where the green Nile River widens to meet the blue sea, there lived a maiden called Rhodopis. Rhodopis? When she was still a small child, Rhodopis had been stolen by pirates. There was pirates in this story. She had been stolen by pirates. She was snatched from her home in Greece and taken across the sea to Egypt, and there she was sold as a slave. I should have a map in front of me because it would be interesting to look at where Greece is and show how she was taken across the sea into Egypt. Maybe look that up with your parents. Go on Google and look for a world map and look for Greece and Egypt. She came from Greece and she was taken to Egypt. Like the Egyptian servant girls, Rhodopis went to the water's edge each day to wash her clothes or to gather the reeds that grew along the riverbank. But Rhodopis looked different from the Egyptian girls. How does she look different? These are the Egyptian girls. How does she look different? Yeah, she has very blonde hair. So she came from a different place, so she looks different. But Rhodopis looked different from the other Egyptian girls. Their eyes were brown and hers were green. Their hair hung straight to their shoulders while the breeze blew hers into tangles. Their skin glowed like copper, but her pale skin burnt red beneath the sun. I get really burnt in the sun. That was how she got her name, for Rhodopis meant rosy-cheeked in Greek. Rosy Rhodopis, scoffed the servant girls, hissing her name between their teeth. Hissing, that's a good word. Hissing her name between their teeth. That doesn't sound like they're saying it very nicely, right? Rhodopis pretended not to hear, but she blushed, rosier than ever. Although her master was kind, he was old, and he liked to doze beneath a fig tree. He seldom heard the servant girls teasing Rhodopis. He never saw them ordering her about. "Hurry, Rhodopis," they would shout at her. "The geese are in the garden, eating up my onions." "Mend my robe." "I'm hungry, Rhodopis. Bake the bread." Rhodopis always hurried to do their bidding, for the Egyptian girls were household servants, and she was the only slave. Rhodopis found friends among the animals. Instead, birds ate crumbs from her hands, she coaxed a monkey to sit upon her shoulder, and charmed a hippopotamus with her songs. What's my favorite animal? Do you remember? Ah! A hippopotamus! I didn't know there had a hippopotamus in the story. That's awesome. It would raise its huge head from the muddy water and prick its small ears to listen. Sometimes when her chores were done and the day had cooled, Rhodopis would dance for her animal companions. She twirled so lightly that her tiny bare feet scarcely touched the ground. One evening her master awakened to see her dance. "No goddess is more nimble," he called out. "Such a gift deserves reward." He tugged his chin whiskers, thinking, And then he declared, "You shall go barefoot no longer." So that would have been considered a reward for a slave girl, was to be able to have shoes and not have to go barefooted. So Rhodopis became friends with the animals. That reminded me of a story. Can you think of what story that reminds you of? In our traditional story, who is Cinderella friends with? Yeah, all the little mice that live in the attic with her. So that's similar, right? Her master ordered a pair of dainty slippers made especially for Rhodopis. The soles were of real leather, and the toes were gilded with rose-red gold. Now when Rhodopis danced, her feet sparkled like fireflies. The rose-red slippers set Rhodopis more apart than ever. The Egyptian servant girls were jealous, for they all wore clumsy sandals woven from papyrus? I don't know how to say that word. Papyrus. Papyrus? I'm going to have to look that one up. Out of spite, they found new tasks for her to do, keeping Rhodopis so busy that she was too tired to dance at the end of the day. One evening, Kipa, who was chief among the servant girls, announced, "Tomorrow we sail for Memphis to see the Pharaoh. His Majesty is going to hold court for all of his subjects." "There will be musicians and dancing," said another servant girl, eyeing those red rose slippers. There will be feasting," added a third. "Poor Rhodopis, you must stay behind," Kipa jeered. "You have linen to wash, and grain to grind, and the garden to weed." Does that sound familiar? Leaving her behind and making her do all of the chores? Yeah, kind of sounds like the other ones to me. The next morning, just as Ra the sun was climbing into the sky, Rhodopis followed the servant girls to the riverbank. Kipa wore a necklace of blue beads. Bracelets jingled on the wrists of the second. The third had tied a many-colored sash around her waist. Although Rhodopis wore a plain tunic, on her feet were those red rose slippers. "Perhaps they will let me come along to see the Pharaoh after all," she thought. But the three servant girls pulled their raft around the bend in the river without giving Rhodopis a backward glance. So they're off to see the Pharaoh. Look who's in the water. A hippopotamus. Rhodopis sighed, and she turned to the basket piled high with dirty clothes. "Wash the linen, weed the garden, grind the grain. She slapped the wooden paddle against the cloth in time to her song. The hippopotamus, tired of so dull a tune, pushed out of the reeds and splashed into the river. "Shame," cried Rhodopis, shaking her paddle. "You splattered mud on my beautiful slippers." She polished the shoes on the hem of her tunic until the rosy gold glittered in the sun. Then she carefully put them on the bank behind her. What happens? She laid them down on the ground. Who got them? Looks like some kind of a bird. "Wash the linen, weed the garden," Rhodopis began again, when suddenly a shadow fell on the water. Rhodopis jumped up. A great falcon, the symbol of the god of Horus, circled in the sky, and the wings spread so wide that they blotted out the sun. "Greetings to you, proud Horus," Rhodopis murmured. She bowed her head, and she felt a rush of air at the back of her neck. When Rhodopis dared to lift her eyes, she saw the falcon soar away. Dangling from his talons was one of the beautiful slippers. Where'd I go? "Stop," she pleaded. "Come back." But the bird did not heed her. He flew toward the sun until he was no more than a dark speck against the gold. Rhodopis bit her tongue. One shoe was worse than none at all. Now she'd have to dance like a stork, hopping around on one foot. And even the monkey would laugh. Rhodopis tucked the slipper into her tunic and returned to her laundry, salting the river with her tears. After Rhodopis had lost sight of the falcon, the mighty bird followed the course of the Nile to the city of Memphis, to the square where the pharaoh was holding court. There the falcon watched and waited. And what does he have in his talons? The red slipper. The pharaoh's name was Amasis, and on his head he wore a red and white crown of two. On his head he wore the red and white crown of the two Egypts. The double crown was heavy and pinched his ears. He preferred driving his chariot fast as the wind to sitting on this throne. He doesn't sound like he's having such a good time, right? At that very moment, the falcon dropped the rose-red slipper into his lap. The slipper was so bright that Amasis thought it was a scrap of the sun. Then he saw the falcon wheeling overhead. "The god Horus sent me a sign," exclaimed the pharaoh. He picked up the rose-red slipper. "Every maiden in Egypt must try on this shoe." That sounds familiar. "She whose foot it fits shall be my queen." That is the will of the gods. Amasis dismissed the court. He called for his chariot, and he began his search at once. So he's going to go out himself, looking for who fits the shoe. The slipper. When the Egyptian servant girls arrived in Memphis, they found the throne empty and the streets deserted. They were so angry on their return that even seeing Rhodopis without her rose-red slipper did not please them. "Slaves are better off barefoot," snapped Kipa. The pharaoh journeyed from city to city. He tracked the desert where pyramids tower over the sand, and he climbed the steep cliffs where falcons nest. The rose-red slipper was always in his hand. Wherever he went, women and girls, rich and poor, flocked to try on the slipper, but no one could fit in the small shoe. It was made specially for her, wasn't it? So the longer Amasis searched, the more determined that he became to marry the maiden who had lost the tiny slipper. He summoned his royal barge. What's a barge? He summoned his royal barge and vowed to visit every landing along the Nile. The Nile is a river in Egypt, and a barge would be like a boat. So the barge was hung with sails of silk. Trumpets blared, and the oarsmen rowed to the beat of the gongs. The din was so dreadful that when the barge rounded the bend in the river, Rhodopis fled in alarm, but the servant girls ran to the water's edge. The din. Trumpets blared, and the oarsmen rowed to the beat of the gongs. The din? I think din must mean sound. Din. D-I-N. D-in. I've never heard that word before. I'm going to write it down so that I can remember to look it up. D-I-N. But from the sentence, I think it means sound. The sound was so dreadful that when the barge rounded the bend, Rhodopis fled. Rhodopis ran away. Okay. Whew. Sometimes you have to stop when you're reading and figure out what it means. Because if you just keep reading and you don't understand, then you might miss something in the story. So, thanks for being patient with me. All right. So now we will see the Pharaoh, cried Kippa. Amasis held up her rose-red slipper. Whoever can wear this shoe shall be my queen. The servant girls knew that shoe, and they knew its owner too. Yet they clapped their hands over their mouths. Do that for a second. Mm-hmm. Can you talk? Mm-hmm. Can you make any noise? Yeah. So they put their hands over their mouths, and they said nothing. If one of them could wear it, first Kippa, then the others tried on the shoe. Each cramped her foot and curled up her toes to try to make them fit inside until tears ran down their cheeks. Still, her heel hung over. Enough, said Amasis wearily. He would have to set sail again and had not chanced to see Rhodopis. Had he not chanced to see Rhodopis peering through the reeds. So she's watching. She ran away, but she watched them try on the shoe. Come, he commanded. You must try on this rose-red slipper. The servant girls gawked, open-mouthed, as the Pharaoh kneeled before Rhodopis. He slipped the tiny shoe on her foot with ease. Of course it fit her perfectly, right? Then Rhodopis pulled its mate from the folds of her tunic. Behold, cried Amasis, in all this land there is none so fit to be queen. But Rhodopis is a slave, protested one of the servant girls. Kippa sniffed. She's not even Egyptian. She is the most Egyptian of all, the Pharaoh declared, for her eyes are as green as the Nile, her hair as feathery as papyrus, and her skin the pink of a lotus flower. The Pharaoh led Rhodopis to the royal barge, and with every step her rose-red slippers winked and sparkled in the sun. And there's that. There's the monkey, and the bird, and the hippopotamus is watching. The end. So at the end, there is a little author's note about the Cinderella story, and that it says that the first recorded Cinderella story was recorded by a Roman historian in the 1st century, a long, long time ago. So Cinderella has been around in one way or another for a very long time. So it's time to kind of start thinking about these stories. Did you like one better than the other? I had never read this one, so this was a new one for me. I kind of liked it because it had a hippopotamus in it. So remember we read the Mexican Cinderella, Adelita? Yeah, Adelita. The rough-faced girl, Mufaro's beautiful daughters, and now the Egyptian Cinderella. So that's something that you can be thinking about too as we read these, because you might like one more than another. So think about that as you read them. And join me again tomorrow for one more. It's the hardest one for me to read. It's got a lot of words in it that are hard for me to pronounce. So watch out. I'm going to practice tonight. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.